Hi, I'm Andy Van Kleunen, CEO of National Skills Coalition, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another of NSC's Fireside Chats, a series of conversations with national leaders about the importance of sustained federal investments in the skills of America's working people, particularly now that we need to be including everyone in our nation's post-pandemic economic recovery. I'm truly honored to be joined today by Secretary of Commerce and former Governor of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo. We're going to be talking about her efforts, both past and current, to increase investments in skills training to help build an equitable economic growth strategy in partnership with local industry. Then, after my discussion with Secretary Raimondo, I'll be joined by a couple of my esteemed colleagues for their take on the Secretary's comments. But before I jump in with Secretary Raimondo, a word about National Skills Coalition. For the past 2 decades, NSC's members have been fighting for a new national commitment to inclusive, high-quality skills training so that more people in America might have access to a better life, and so more local businesses might see sustained growth within their rapidly changing industries. Last fall, in response to the pandemic, our coalition's leaders released Skills for an Inclusive Economic Recovery, a policy agenda to address the disproportionate impact of the COVID recession on workers of color, immigrants, women, people without a college degree, as well as our nation's small and medium-sized businesses. And since then, we've been working with tens of thousands of stakeholders who comprise our coalition: business leaders, labor leaders, community organizations and community colleges, and the public sector, to fight for generation-defining investments in high-quality inclusive skills training as part of our nation's economic recovery responses. So I'm thrilled to have Secretary Raimondo join me today to talk about what she saw as governor regarding the values of skills training as a strategy for local economic prosperity, and about how she's bringing that experience to her role as our nation's new Secretary of Commerce. Secretary Raimondo, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm very pleased to be here.
Great. So let's get right into it. Clearly, there's a lot going on in Washington, D.C. about the president's Build Back Better plan. And you've been spending a lot of time both in Washington and traveling around the country, lifting up some of the key components of that proposal, including the president's proposed investments in workforce training. And you've been pretty clear that this is something that's going to be important for businesses who are looking for skilled workers, including in those industries where we're hoping to create some jobs in manufacturing and infrastructure. But it's also going to be really important for the workers who've been most impacted by this pandemic, to give them a chance to be part of this recovery. And you've said several times over in different environments that equity is a big part of the president's plan. Equity is a big part of what it is that you're trying to achieve there at the Commerce Department, and that these investments in job training are a big part of that. Could you talk a little bit more about what you see as the link between job training and equity as we're talking about economic recovery?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. And thank you to you and the National Skills Coalition for all that you do and for having me here. So a couple of things. First, I want to reiterate what you said, which is that the president is deeply committed to equity and a comprehensive approach to advancing equity by focusing on populations in underserved communities that for a long time have been denied an opportunity to fully participate in our economy. And the reality is, and you know this as well as better than anyone, a lot of times women, people of color, immigrants, folks who grow up in a place that don't have great public education, the reason they are left out of economic equality and good opportunity is because they lack the skills necessary for high wage jobs. And so the truth of the matter is, and some of it's because they can't afford it. Some of it is because they can't take time out of work in order to go to get an education or get skills. But the reality is we have to break down those barriers so everybody can have the skills they need to get a good job. And for some people, that's a 4-year degree. But for many people, a 4-year degree is out of reach because they can't afford it. So the president's Build Back Better agenda, which we are all literally negotiating right now in Congress, literally right now, includes funding for 1 million more registered apprenticeships, includes billions of dollars for sector-based job training, includes investments to make sure that everyone can go to community college for 2 years, tuition free. And importantly, the president is also wants to make sure that the Department of Commerce work hand in hand with the Department of Labor and Education, so that we're not just providing, job training or community college that doesn't lead to a job, or that we also have to modernize the way we do apprenticeships. It's an 84-year-old program. We need to move beyond just the building trades. We need digital apprenticeships, tech apprenticeships. So President's fully committed to it. The U.S. has underinvested in our workers and workforce for decades. And if we want to compete with the rest of the world and give our workers a chance, we need to invest. And so that's why the president's prioritizing equitable job training.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. I think the point that you make, Secretary, about, for such a dynamic economy as ours, that one part of our strategy for how we grow our economy, investing in our workers, is something that we don't actually lead the world at. We actually don't do a great job of it relative to a lot of our competitor nations. Like, clearly that needs to be part of the economic growth strategy for this country moving forward. And I think Build Back Better does a great job of kind of putting a focus on that. But you dealt with some of those issues in your prior job. So most folks would know that before becoming Commerce Secretary, you were governor of Rhode Island. And you two were trying to kind of figure out some economic growth strategies there. And amongst the things that you did is you created this new program called Real Jobs Rhode Island, which was using state resources to create these new partnerships in key industries for the state and bringing together small employers and other larger employers within that sector, along with other stakeholders, to kind of figure out, like, what is it that we're going to do to train folks in a way that's going to be good for the businesses to help them grow, and it's going to be good for folks living in Rhode Island to be part of that sector's future. And, at National Skills Coalition, we do a lot about analyzing what's going on out in the states. And we always have lifted up Real Jobs Rhode Island as what we thought was one of the model state programs for how it was to bring these kinds of industry-based partnerships together. So here we are, you're now Secretary of Commerce, and you brought some of that thinking to how it is that now you're thinking about how resources are going to be given out by your department, including this new Good Jobs Challenge that you recently announced. Maybe talk a little bit about not just about the challenge, but how your experience as governor is informing what the position that you've been taking on these workforce development investments now as our nation's Secretary of Commerce.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the kind words about real jobs. I view it as among the most important things I did as governor, and it has enabled thousands of Rhode Islanders to get a decent job. And we call the program Real Jobs versus real training, because we were only successful if people got a job. Mm-hmm. And when I came to the Commerce Department, we received $3 billion from Congress to do a local economic development. And because of my experience in Rhode Island with this job training, I launched the first time ever, I'm told, in Department of Commerce history, a job training challenge, which we're calling the Good Jobs Challenge. Mm-hmm. Again, we want to make sure it's not training, it's jobs. And mm-hmm. So the Good Jobs Challenge, it's a $500 million. It's competition. We want cities, states to build coalitions to come forward to compete for the money. And it's designed to do what we did in Rhode Island, which is bring all the actors to the table to support local talent pipelines. So that means, and it's very bottom-up driven, community organizers, nonprofit training partners, community colleges, unions, partnering with employers. And the employers need to make commitments to hire, and they need to be part of designing the curriculum for the job training. We're also very much encouraging of earn while you learn type models. Mm-hmm. In Rhode Island, we learned, you asked about my experience, we learned this was one of the most impactful things we could do to get particularly mid-career folks back to work. And particularly if you want women, people of color, low-wage folks, single parents. If you're a, 45-year-old woman with 2 kids working a minimum wage job, you cannot give up your job to go back to college. Can't do it. So you need an apprenticeship or earn while you learn type of a thing where the employer pays you to work and trains you. And so that's what we want to incentivize and provide funding for with the Good Jobs Challenge. It's what we did in Rhode Island. And, we had terrific results getting women, veterans, formerly incarcerated folks, people who had no real, who needed skills or digital skills to have a chance to get those skills and get a decent paying job.
Mm-hmm. And the key part of that is that you really were bringing the business community to the same table with the folks who are trying to figure out what's the right education and support service and training strategies that we need to help all of these workers succeed in that sector. And that's that, having that feedback loop and having everybody there at the table, it doesn't always work out that way. So sometimes government needs to step in to kind of get folks to the table and then let the private sector work with each other to kind of figure some of that stuff out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so I've got one last question for you, because I know, as you said, you're very busy, but I wanted to build on this question around partnerships. So we've talked a lot about partnerships out there in labor markets, but there's another partnership you mentioned it a little while ago. You are out there with other members of the president's cabinet, including Labor Secretary Marty Walsh and Education Secretary Miguel Cardona, talking about what it is that you are doing as agencies working together on some of these issues, and to kind of say, agencies working together kind of show how we can do this for both workers and businesses. This is a kind of thing that we talk about across stakeholders. It's also something that, if you pull outside of DC, this is also something that's very popular, to be investing in people's skills across Democrats, Republicans, independents. This is a widely held kind of mom and apple pie kind of issue. So my question for you is, given how divided Washington is on some things these days, why isn't this the issue where we can get everybody together to make sure that this is something that's going to be part of the final Build Back Better agenda? What is it that, or the package, I should say, what is it that we can do to kind of raise the urgency about how important these investments in people's skills are going to be?
Yeah. So again, it's a really, really good question. I hope we can. When I talk to businesses, which I try to do every single day, it's not an exaggeration to say that every business leader I talk to in every industry tells me that their number one problem right now is access to talent. Everyone says we need to expand the labor pool. I need more folks with digital skills, data skills. It's astounding to me that every business leader, from the smallest companies to the biggest companies, says this is what they need. They all like apprenticeships. They all are in favor of using the community college system as a workforce development engine in America. So the desire for workforce solutions that can create real pathways to a skilled workforce and good jobs is widespread and is bipartisan. It's essential for business competitiveness. And so, we just, pound that drum. I will tell you, I've been, talking to people on Capitol Hill. I don't find opposition. I talk to Republicans, I talk to Democrats, I talk to governors, mayors. When I was a Democratic governor, I worked with Republican governors on this issue. There isn't opposition. The challenge is making sure that it's enough people's number one priority so that it stays in the package. It's top priority for the president, but there's a lot of competing priorities, pressure to make the total size of the bill smaller. And so what we all need to do is make sure it stays in and stays in a meaningful number. It has to be a number one priority. I suppose the last thing I'll say is I'm very, very lucky to have two amazing colleagues in Secretary Walsh at the Labor Department and Secretary Cardona at Education. And the three of us have been working as a team to implement these programs, but also to highlight to members of Congress how important it is and that we will be working together. And I do think that's important, that commerce works with labor. It's good for workers and businesses. And I think we have to continue to pound that drum.
Absolutely. Well, Secretary Gina Raimondo, thanks so much for joining me today. And thank you for pounding that drum because we need your leadership and the leadership of others to make sure that we have some high quality inclusive skills training and the Build Back Better package that we hope that states around the country are going to have a chance to make use of before too long. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, so now let's get some reactions to Secretary Raimondo's comments from some leaders who have been on the front lines of fighting for investments in high quality inclusive skills training to help both America's workers and businesses. And I might add they're bringing perspectives from 3 different industries. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Chandler Morse, who's the head of North America Public Policy for the cloud-based software company Workday. Chandler, how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Next, we have Carolyn Lee. Carolyn is the executive director of the Manufacturing Institute at the National Association of Manufacturers. Carolyn, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And finally, Dr. Sekou Siby, who is the executive director of Restaurant Opportunity Center, or ROC United. Sekou, good to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So let's get into talking a little bit about what the Secretary of Commerce had to say and how that resonates with some of the things that you all are doing in your own industries on some of these issues. Chandler, let's start with you. So the Commerce Department obviously is about trying to advocate and figure out what our nation's business community needs. You at Workday recently partnered with companies from around the country, both larger international firms like yours, as well as smaller companies like those that are part of NSC's Business Leaders United network, inviting everyone to sign on to a joint letter to Congress stressing the need to maintain the $100 billion investment in workforce training that President Biden called for in his original Build Back Better plan. So why would Workday take the lead on something like that? And given your company's interest in these issues, how does that resonate with some of the things that you heard from Secretary Raimondo today?
Well, thanks, Andy. That's a great question, and I want to start before I get to the answer by just thanking National Skills Coalition. Workday's had the chance to partner with NSC a couple of times. Your capacity, the leadership, your technical expertise, it's just such a pleasure. That letter that we led, also we were joined with Autodesk, another team involved on workforce issues that we work with pretty regularly. So why do we wade into this? At Workday, we believe that skills are really the currency of the changing world of work. A focus on skills really is that right framework for approaching today's workforce development challenges. And it was really great to hear the secretary mention this, a way to walk forward with a more equitable economic recovery. As the economy continues to respond to the impacts of COVID-19, and then we've seen this generational shift in occupational roles, we stressed in the letter, we were joined by, to be honest, more folks than we thought we would be. Always better to have it go that way than the other.
Sure.
That we're in an all of the above moment, and that federal investment in workforce skills and training development it's just critical. We just can't sort of close the skills gap without it. I really appreciated the secretary's comments on a couple of other avenues, if I can just touch on those.
Sure.
One was in that all of the above bucket is a real emphasis on leveraging employer-led training and incentivizing employer-led training. She touched on some of the efforts that the Commerce Department's looking at there. And then lastly, we can fund, we can train, we can pile resources in, but if we don't really have the data on how to target those resources towards those open and emerging roles, you can end up with sort of a mismatch. And so I really appreciated her focus on not skills programs or skills training, but leading to those good jobs. Programs that are really oriented towards growing economic opportunity, growing additional skills that can be put right to work. So we've really really been pushing towards that demand-driven orientation for skills program on government-sponsored data that identifies like real-time economy-wide trends and emerging roles and skills. And I think I was just I'm just so pleased to have a secretary who has on-the-ground experience with these issues, right at the helm of a critical agency, and to continue partnering with National Skills Coalition.
You're absolutely right, Chandler. As quickly as things are changing in the labor market, I mean, we need the best data. We need on-the-ground intelligence from companies that are shifting their operations and trying to figure out how to keep their current workforces ahead of that tech curve, how to bring new folks in. So it's highly dynamic, and we need to have everybody kind of pulling in the same direction for us to be able to solve this moving forward, particularly coming out of this pandemic. So Carolyn, let me turn to you. Speaking of sectors that have changed a lot. So you work with manufacturers all over the country. And as you know, a big chunk of the Build Back Better plan call for significant new investments in expanding the manufacturing sector, onshoring some domestic production in areas where we think the US could be a bigger leader, things like that. And there's a key element of a workforce strategy in the proposal there. And certainly Secretary Raimondo talked about this, not just in what they're trying to accomplish out of the Commerce Department, but things that she did with local manufacturers back in Rhode Island to kind of build these kind of local partnerships around these strategies. I'm curious what you're hearing from local manufacturers from around the country about why investments in workforce training need to be part of this recovery plan for the manufacturing sector moving forward.
Yeah, and Andy, let me also thank you for having me and this conversation and NSC's leadership. It's great to be a partner with you. This is such a critical challenge. And so, as you mentioned before, the Manufacturing Institute is the workforce development and education partner for the National Association of Manufacturers. And the NAM, having 14,000 members across all sectors, across all of the country and all industrial sectors, the thing we are hearing, and the Secretary said it as well, the access to talent is the top concern for employers. There is no company I've talked to in years, actually, but particularly in the last several months, where this isn't an issue. In fact, we have 889,000 open jobs in manufacturing, according to the most recent JOLTS number. And the MI's research with Deloitte in our 5th talent study that we released this past May, we found that we'll have 4 million jobs to fill by the end of the decade. Of those, 2.1 million will go unfilled because we don't have the people with the skills. And so for us, I think it's two things. It's a little bit what Chandler talked about. It's matching the skills with the openings so people know what employers are looking for. But in manufacturing, we have this larger problem. I think it's a first problem is that perception. People don't know these jobs are here and that they're jobs that they would be interested in. Parents don't know these are good jobs for their students, for their children, and that these jobs have a good future. And so they don't encourage their children to pursue manufacturing careers. And so we first need to change the perception of the sector, and then we need to expand partnerships and training opportunities. And like Chandler, I think it's an all of the above training opportunity where we have people in jobs that are open today that are 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years of training and beyond that, right? And we have an all of the above need for people to get this training. And so to reiterate what the Secretary said, there are many workforce solutions to create pathways to good jobs. And so when we're looking at creating and strengthening workforce solutions through skills training, as both you and the Secretary said, we need investments, and we need to invest in education and training in order to close the skills gap, diversify our workforce, and continue to invest in the growth of the sector. But we need creative partnerships, and we need room for partnerships between the government and education institutions and industry. And we need those incentives for manufacturers to invest in on-the-job training. We did a study 2 years ago. We found about $25 billion were being spent by manufacturers on upskilling their existing workforce. That isn't even what they're investing in order to attract people into the sector. And manufacturers don't expect schools to shoulder the whole burden of training all alone, but incentives and things in the tax code can support and help manufacturers make these investments. But we need to recognize that education and training isn't a destination. Education and training is lifelong now, right? We're in a world of lifelong learning. We need workers, even once they've attained a job, to continue to be able to access training and do that affordably. And we need to continue that path of lifelong learning to be able to continue to adapt to the changing workforce and the changing technology, particularly in a sector like manufacturing. And these are some of the things that we see huge opportunity in the Good Jobs Challenge. And so it was great to hear you talk about that with the secretary. You know, the Good Jobs Challenge is a great example of what manufacturers are looking for, the collaboration between employers and community partners, and the flexibility for employers to choose the training model that works best for them. You know, I think not only is this unlike any other funding opportunity we've ever seen, and the size of it, of course, is tremendous, but you know, there is no one size fits all workforce solution. It is local, it is regional. And so the investments from the Department of Commerce will have a lasting impact on the manufacturing sector. And so it's great to be able to partner on so many of the Good Jobs Challenge. We're working with entities all across the country to help them organize their submissions, because we really got to dig in and build these partnerships. And that's why it's great to be here with the National Skills Coalition and all of you. And we look forward to continuing to work with the administration. And it's great to have a passionate leader like Secretary Raimondo who cares and has personal experience with manufacturing.
Thanks, Carolyn. Of course, we appreciate the chance to work with all of you at NAM and the Manufacturing Institute also. And just to reiterate, folks know obviously that we're still figuring out what investments are going to be happening in workforce training as part of the Build Back Better package that Congress is debating. But the Good Jobs Challenge grants that Carolyn was talking about, that money's already been appropriated. That was money that came out of the American Rescue Plan earlier this year. So those grants are happening. Applications are now being put in with the Commerce Department, and we're hoping that partnerships in a range of industries, including manufacturing, are looking at how it is that they can be developed to try to get some folks into jobs, including those almost 900,000 open jobs in manufacturing that Carolyn just talked about. So let me turn now to Sekou. So Sekou, we've talked about software development, we've talked about manufacturing. We've often said this pandemic has had different impacts on different groups of workers and different sectors. And obviously the restaurant and hospitality sector has had its particular challenges because of this pandemic. Rock United has always been focused on the needs to reform that industry. And we've talked a lot about jobs, and I know that you're trying to make sure that there's good jobs and careers for folks within that industry. But particularly now, you're trying to focus what is it we can do for restaurant workers coming out of this recovery, recognizing that the hospitality sector may look very different than it did prior to March 2020. As we've talked a few times now, we've talked about kind of the importance of these kinds of partnerships between advocates and education and training providers and employers themselves about how to figure these things out by industry, and to talk not just about training, but as the secretary said, about the jobs that are resulting from that training. So why is it important for you and the folks at Rock that Congress include some investments in workforce training and partnership development as part of this economic recovery plan, particularly for restaurant workers?
Thank you very much, Andy, for having me. I think investing in the hospitality industry worker is particularly important for many reasons. Number one, the ROC mission is to improve wages and working conditions, which is not possible without a partnership with employers, because workers' improvement equates with manufacturing and employers, performance improvement. So we want to say that the most important asset of any business is the human capital, meaning the workforce. For business operating in a post-COVID competitive market, a skilled and trained workforce could be a source of higher productivity. It is also well known that trained and competent employees deliver significant impact on firm overall performance. For employees, training and workforce development create growth opportunities, especially for low-wage workers who are predominantly women, people of color, and immigrants. Restaurant workers, for the most part, do not have access to higher education and skills that can provide access to higher paying jobs in the industry. For example, 64% of restaurant workers have high school diploma or did not finish high school. This is not because the workforce is young, because 61% of restaurant workers are over the age of 24. But the lack of investment too has a cost. For example, small and medium-sized businesses with limited resources those that are incapable of creating growth opportunity for workers could face significant challenges because of the prohibitive cost of employee turnover. Because workers need skill to increase job security, investment in industry-specific workforce should also rely on equitable policies to diminish the growing gap between productivity and wages and improve economic security for our workforce. And for us, equitable investment in inclusive, high-quality skill training can narrow class and race divide in job opportunities. With training, we can help facilitate a recovery that centers workers who are being sidelined in the industry, providing skill and training for immigrant, women, workers of color, and others who have been excluded from higher paid positions. For example, the pandemic led to rapid digitization in the restaurant industry. Workers need to learn to use and maintain tablets, phone-based application, and other online ordering system to guarantee wages above minimum wage. Digital literacy has become crucial if workers have to troubleshoot technological problems. So retraining and retooling is especially important for workers who have been sidelined in the industry, providing skill and training for immigrant women and people of color, and workers who have been excluded from higher paid jobs. This is an essential part of a just and inclusive recovery. So yes, to sum up, we agree with Secretary Raimondo, and we must invest in American workers' skills in order to build a better economy for everyone.
Sekou, thank you so much for that. And you're absolutely right. Like, we do need to be paying attention to the jobs that we have available in different industries, but we also need to recognize that where it is that we can create not just a job, but a career for folks, and the ability to keep people on the job in a rapidly changing sector like the hospitality and restaurant sector, as you mentioned. Digitalization is reshaping that sector in such a dramatic way. We need to make sure that workers can stay in that sector. We need to invest in them, and then we need to give them some chance to then advance from there, so they can really develop good careers. And we know that you've identified how to do that within the restaurant sector so effectively. So thank you for all of your work that you've done on that front. Well, I want to thank all of my panelists, Chandler, Carolyn, Sekou. I really appreciate your joining me for this conversation. Keep up the great work that you're doing in your respective industries, and National Skills Coalition continues to look forward to working with you on these issues moving into the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And sure thing. Great day. It was great to be with you today. And let me thank both Secretary Raimondo for her time in this discussion, and for all of you who tuned in again for this fireside chat. I know that many of you are very passionate about the important role that investing in people should play in helping us achieve an inclusive economic recovery. And National Skills Coalition wants to make sure that your voice is heard. So if you haven't done it yet, please go to nationalskillsfiresidechats.com and sign your organization on to a letter calling on Congress to maintain the full investments in workforce development as proposed by President Biden in his Build Back Better plan. As my panelist guests have said today, this is going to be so important if we're going to try to make sure that everybody gets a chance to be included in this economic recovery moving forward. And I also ask you to please keep an eye out for future fireside chats that we will have as I continue to discuss these issues with national leaders, both in Washington and from around the country. I hope you join us for those future conversations.